But everybody, welcome. I'm David Kinder. I'm the admin of the life insurance agent discussion group and the advanced whole life group. And we got a lot of really great people that essentially, when I was asked to be a moderator for this group, I decided I wanted to build it for me. And who would I want to hear from? Who would I want to connect with? And I just started reaching out to anybody I've ever heard of, who had ever spoken. And Kelly, you might not remember this. You were scheduled to speak in Corona here about 3 years ago. I missed it. And I was like, okay, I got to come out and I got to know what are people doing. And we finally met in person at an Ohio National Regional event here in Irvine.
Yeah, at that university.
Concordia or something, I think it was. They had a separate campus or something. Yeah. And so we met there. I'd already gotten started with the Breakaway League. And so I was learning a lot from Tom Love and some of the mentors there. And then when we met and you shared with me what you were doing, I was like, wow, there could be a fit here as an extension of our message as to what we do. And so, I'm going to give you a full introduction here, but I want to let you know how we met. And I'm just thinking like, wow, there's some compatibility and that we can really enhance our message, let alone anybody else, whoever is working with business owners that are of this caliber, that we could really provide this value. So let me give the formal introduction, but here. And so this presentation will discuss programs designed to enable business owners to reposition taxable profits into tax-exempt retained capital using one or more of Capital Smith's offset strategies, including but not limited to Capital Smith's pre-leveraged and or capitalized ESOPs as components, which, when properly combined with the appropriate trusts and additional agreements, forms a fully insured financial infrastructure. Kelly's worked in the insurance financial services industries for over 40 years. He obtained his undergraduate degrees in finance and marketing with a secondary emphasis in accounting and economics. Kelly has been a consistent qualified member of the $1 Million Roundtable for all 45 years, including his rookie year, with 24 years membership in the Court of the Table and 15-year membership at Top of the Table. As the youngest member of the MDRT Quarter Century Club, Kelly stays very active in the MDRT through the MDRT mentoring program, which he was my MDRT mentor. I'm just going to point that out. And he's also involved with the MDRT Knights Foundation, and that's the charitable arm of the $1 Million Roundtable, if you're not familiar with that. So I'm really excited to learn more, to dive more into this. And I'm just going to let everybody know up front, this is like learning a new language. You think you know personal financial stuff, this stuff takes it to another level. And so I know that when Kelly and I, whenever we meet, I always get my mind expanded. At the same time, like, okay, I got to remember, how do I translate that to me so I can remember what this all this means? And so we're going to go back and forth. I'm going to help with the presentation and such. And there are times we might get into a little bit of the weeds. We'll try to bring it back and make sure we actually understand the concepts and what we're trying to grasp. So I'm looking forward to this. Kelly, thank you so much. I'm really excited.
I'm happy to be here. This is a great opportunity, and I'm hoping that Richard Coffin here is one of my partners, and Brian. We work with Brian also, but they'll help you bring me back out of the weeds, because I have a tendency to go there. So first off, what is an ESOP? I mean, people hear of ESOPs, and I've often made the mistake that I just assume that people know what they are. ESOPs were part of the original qualified plan design with ERISA, but they go back further than that. Conceptually, they were used hundreds of years ago with sharecropping, things like that. And then in the 1800s, companies like Procter & Gamble and there were a few of them, they would issue shares of stock along the way to favored employees to augment their retirement. And then in about the early 50s, a gentleman, Lou Kelso, he's a tax attorney, world-known economist, and he started developing these structures. The first one that was official was a newspaper up in the Bay Area, and the two partners were retiring. Their family couldn't run it, and they didn't want to just try to sell it, because then all the valued employees they had for 40 years would lose their jobs, et cetera. So they were wanting to transfer it to their employees. The employees didn't have the money. So when Kelso got involved, he structured in such a way that would facilitate the corporation to go out and borrow the money. So you hear the term leveraged ESOPs, and that's almost 100% of the market. It's what we do is a little different, but we do leverage ESOPs, but we're primarily in the contributory mode. Now, the ESOP is part of the ERISA code. It has all the same contribution limits. It has all the same regulations on vesting. It has all of the same characteristics of, what they could do with the plan and how they put the employees into it and stuff. The main difference is that, with a few exceptions, it's primarily employer stock. It's not, you're not putting in mutual funds or anything like that. As a result, we've noticed, and it's been backed up by, like Stanford University, Harvard, Wharton, that the employees respond positively. There's usually an increase in productivity. There's a higher retention level. And they've done some statistics in the last few years that, like the average 401k, I don't remember the exact dollars, but the average 401k at retirement is, I think, under 100,000. And the average equity share for an employee with an ESOP is close to $1 million. So what happens is that the company jumps up in value because everybody's got this kumbaya, part ownership feeling. And what it's done typically for the purpose of the employer, the owner, to exit the business. Typical scenario that I describe is, the owner, he's got a business and he's thinking, well, my kids will run it. I'll just step down, my kids will run it. Well, that's not always the case. When I'm talking to them, I said, have you had a chance to talk to them about that? And lo and behold, in a lot of cases, the kids don't want it. The son wants to be an attorney, the daughter wants to be a doctor, but then she's going to be now a influencer on YouTube or something, and the son's going to go find himself in Maui selling shaved ice or something. But they don't want to take over the construction. They don't want to pound nails. They don't want to flip steaks. They don't want to, they just want to go with their life. So then he's faced with the situation that this company he started 40, 50 years ago for $10,000 is now worth, let's say, $20 million. And under the current, like if he's in California, he's going to lose almost 40% of that in capital gains taxes. So a lot of the professionals, the CPAs and the attorneys, are familiar with the selling side of an ESOP, that if you sell the business to the ESOP, you have what they call a 1042 exchange. It's like a 1031, 1035. It postpones the capital gains for at least 30 years, but they have to also put in what they call qualified replacement property. And in theory, the owner should buy a whole bunch of stocks, but a lot of groups that are out there, for instance, like UBS, where Carl's with, they have a fund that was designed specifically for ESOP exit strategies. It's such a balanced fund of like almost immovable, investment vehicles, bonds, and all these things inside, that it doesn't go up or down very much, and therefore they can do the equivalent of like a margin. So if a guy sells a company for 50 million, he puts 5 million into that, and he gets like a 10-to-1 offset for the qualified replacement property, in lieu of going out and spending $50 million on stocks and bonds. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the leveraged ESOPs have a tendency to be very complicated. One of the reasons that if there's any negativity, it's because the guy who wants to sell, he's pulling a whole bunch of experts together like in warp speed time. Because if you're going to do a leveraged ESOP from the outset, you've got to have an attorney for almost everybody there. You have an attorney for the TPA, for the employees, for the corporation, for the trustee, for the owner. They have two different valuations, and they're all transaction mentality. I mean, they're going to jump in, get their job done, and they go on to the next one. And nobody's talking to each other. I used the idea of the joke with the three blind men trying to describe an elephant. Well, that's kind of what happens there. And what happens?
I'm sorry, all those attorneys are representing a fiduciary duty for each role within
Exactly.
the ESOP to represent everybody's best interest. So if you think about the current best interest rules and everything regarding qualified plans and how we're advising the public, we're supposed to be a fiduciary standard. Imagine four different fiduciaries, each trying to represent different aspects of this plan. I just want to paint that
But
picture.
and it's a valid point because they're not a team. Again, they're each one has their transaction duty and responsibility and fiduciary responsibility with the actual client, which might be either the employees or the trust or the third party. And so I won't say it's an adversarial situation, but one of the leveraged ESOPs that I did, it was adversarial because the father who was bringing the kids into the business, he started developing health problems and he had to accelerate it. So I got a phone call from his CPA and from his banker. And they said, why don't you go talk to such and such? Well, when I met with him, an engineering background company, and he was chief cook and bottle washer. He was CEO, CFO, I mean, chief engineering officer, everything. So as we were bringing people in, and I had the help then of a gentleman named Mike Harden, who was at Eureka Capital at the time. And it drove us kind of nuts because the situation is that the owner had been so long in a dictatorial position and doing his job well. I mean, I don't mean to be negative, but he was very rigid. And I think we had to replace a trustee at least once. And we had to he fired the first new engineering officer that was brought in. So it had its issues in terms of getting the leverage process finished. And that usually takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months from the date that he starts engaging people. And in that role, the idea is that normally, though, they won't get 100% generally in a leveraged ESOP. The primary bank might give them 25 to 50%. I mean, there's all the multiples of EBITDA and all sorts of, like, checking the market, checking the industry, doing a real forensic on the background of the company. And then if they want more cash, then they end up having to go to like a mezzanine lender, which is a step up in interest rates and being favorable to the risk that they're undertaking. And generally the seller has to take back some seller note. I mean, he'll have some warrants and things like that.
This is the part of pulling equity out of the value so the owner can retire. This is where the money's coming from, which is the bank is paying out money based on the value of the company.
Yeah, and technically they're lending the money to the corporation that does an inside loan to the ESOP.
Okay.
So it's a little complicated, but and there's a lot of moving parts. So if you have a client that immediately wants to jump into a leveraged ESOP, it could be a little bit expensive. I mean, because everybody's charging those fees, and the investment banking can be an arduous task. I mean, it could be a problem, and you're gonna end up paying points for some, grabbing some money from the marketplace, and they have to make sure that everybody's secured. The life insurance involved and what they're going to do with managing the funds. Those are all components that we'd have to take a place with. Now, the market where we work in, and I've actually been doing my particular niche for about 35 years, close 35 to 40 years. And I was in just in the general market with, you're calling on your friends and family and fraternity brothers, people at church, whatever. And I started getting more into the business market. And I was lucky because my first month in the business, I had started at New York Life, and they were having a regional seminar. And the main speaker was Lou Kelso, because a couple of agents at New York Life were really jumping on the bandwagon and doing a lot of business using this new vehicle. And I didn't understand hardly any of it. I mean, I was in a few weeks in the business, I was still memorizing my sales talk. So it was kind of like going over my head, but I was taking a lot of notes. I bought all the books and studied it. And then as I was getting more into higher level net worth people. One of my alumni from my Kappa Sig fraternity was doing a lot of real estate, and he was offsetting it with depreciation and all these. I mean, he was doing some really, the stuff that back 45 years ago with double declining balance, depreciation, all these different kind of things. And he was explaining it to me. Now, we were meeting in his house on the Strand in Manhattan Beach. There was about a 6,000 square foot home with a courtyard behind it and a duplex of rental units, and it was all paid for. And it was paid for by the fruits of his labors with what he called himself a favorable landlord, slumlord. And he would go out and buy and sell a lot of properties. And in doing so, what he did was he would offset it with depreciation. And I'd studied depreciation in my finance classes and accounting and everything else, but I hadn't seen it in the real world. And so we went through the model, and I thought, that sounds a lot like putting stock into an ESOP. So I started working in that market, and I started calling on CPAs and attorneys. I was very fortunate that some of the earlier cases I worked on were with some of the people that are the pillars of the ESOP marketplace. And I got a lot of introduction very fast. It was kind of like drinking from a fire hose, but some of it set in. But see, I was only in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, and I wasn't running across a lot of 65-year-old guys wanting to sell their business. So a lot of my clients were 30, 40 years old that were more interested in not paying taxes, building their business, and seeing their dreams come true over the next 20 years. So I went to the model of like thinking along the lines of a pension. I said, well, we can put shares of stock into the ESOP, get the same dollar for dollar deduction that we would as we were putting a check into a pension plan. Yet the client, the business owner, gets to keep the cash on the books. And so I thought, well, if I can do that and help them not pay taxes, we're going to reposition that taxable profit into either working capital or other investments. He may want to buy the building he's leasing. He may want to just go out and buy other real estate. He may enjoy flipping houses or stocks and bonds or whatever, but he's free to do that because we had offset the tax responsibility on that profit. Now we'd have to make sure that we kept all of us with the eye on the ball, because if he's going to save those taxes every year and do stupid stuff with it, then he's not a client I want to have. But then he's going to have at the other end, after people get vested and decide to leave, that stock's going to have to be repurchased from them. That's how they get the retirement element of it. So the repurchase obligation is one of the key things that fiduciaries, banks, the attorneys, the CPAs, the IRS, the Department of Labor pay a lot of attention to. And in talking with some of the other long-term advisors in this marketplace, I've been told that probably 75, 80% of the businesses out there really haven't funded for the repurchase obligation. And so in that vein, we started developing ancillary parallel vehicles to work with. One of them obviously was life insurance, because if we can have a situation where they're putting some of that into the insurance that they already need, they need it for buy, sell, key man, estate planning, whatever. But if we can facilitate the capital to pay those premiums, which was my first model. My first model was you put $1 of stock into the ESOP, you're going to save 40, 50 cents in taxes back at the beginning, back in the 70s and the 80s. You're going to save 50 cents, and I would take part of that 50 cents and pay premium. Now, over the years, with a lot of different things coming to the marketplace with premium financing and a lot of other stuff, we're actually doing it a little differently. And I'll say, I won't go too deep in that because we do have a PowerPoint later that shows a case study. But I think at this point, I probably should stop for a second and ask if there's—
check in for questions.
Yeah, check in for— because all those guys on the top row on my screen are the ones that are supposed to slap me by the back of the head and say, okay, stop, give time for questions.
So far, I think we're following you, and I don't have any questions. By the way, and I didn't mention this, anybody has questions, throw them in the chat, put them on the Facebook live feed. We'll answer them as they come up, because in case someone gets confused, we don't want you to be confused through the rest of it. We want to answer it as they come in. So we definitely welcome that. I do have the PowerPoint ready when you're ready to move into that, and hopefully my computer will cooperate. Uh, so,
Yeah, it's better you than me. I mean,
okay, we'll get this going here.
Rich, Brian, is there anything that I haven't hit that we should be preparatory for the PowerPoint? Good timing for it?
I think so. Maybe David, just do a quick preview of the of Kelly's website so people can see what the website is if they want to get contact info or a little more info there first.
Yeah, I did put the link in the Facebook group, so it's there. And of course, when I post the recording later, I will do that. But there is his website. It's just capitalsmithfinancial.com. One thing to scroll down for here is click here for this a unique approach to planning. To click on the contributory or pre-leveraged ESOP, and you're going to get their 2-page down and dirty overview on it. So there's that. And something just came in.
Yeah, that's a good.
My husband gets stock as a bonus from his company. Is it ESOP?
There's a lot of confusion with terminology. He might just have a stock bonus plan. What we have to dig down in different situations is that, is he actually getting shares of stock, or is it going into a trust? Is he able to take possession of that stock?
Well, that was just the answer is no. So she's responding in the
Okay.
chat.
Okay, so that could possibly be an ESOP, or it could be a stock bonus plan that will eventually evolve into an ESOP. And if he's getting it where he doesn't pay current tax on it, then that's closer to the funding for the repurchase. So when he goes to leave, they're going to do an accounting of how much stock he has at that point in time. And
She said yes, he pays tax.
Oh, okay, then he's just getting the stock. It's a current benefit. It's not a retirement benefit. So it's the same thing as a cash bonus, essentially.
Yeah, because when I worked at Wells Fargo, a couple decades ago, we had I think it was a cash balance plan, and it was an ESOP type of a thing. But Wells Fargo is huge. This is not for succession, and they're a publicly traded company, of course. So completely different elephant by comparison. But I'm sure there's many different variations. But this is what we're talking about is for the privately owned corporate owner that is sizable enough where they need to look at something else and probably don't want to go public because they would rather transition it to the employees because they don't have someone else that they have identified that would take over.
And it used to be that a lot of times people would say, well, do I want to do an ESOP, or do I want to have private equity, or do an IPO or something like that? What we're seeing now is there's a lot of emerging involvement into the ESOP world from the private equity people. They're actually seeing advantages. They're not just doing a simple private equity buyout. They actually get involved putting the ESOP together with them and stuff like that. So there's a lot of congressional help coming our way right now. And when they started doing stuff against pensions and profit sharing, and I mean, who does KEOs anymore? KEOs were part of the original ERISA, and I don't think I've run across a KEO in decades. And so they did a lot of damage. Congress is like that. If they see one thing wrong, they're going to walk in with a sledgehammer. And they've never done anything like that to ESOPs. ESOPs have always been kind of bipartisan, and they're actually more legislation now. So what we're going to see now, and part of the reason for the idea of the new era in ESOPs, is we're going to see a lot more involvement. I'm getting a lot more phone calls from people looking me up on the ESOP Association or the NCEO or a lawyer out of Atlanta. We're seeing more opportunities. And with the education process, we're not just getting the 65-year-old guy that wants to walk away in 6 months. We're educating, and we're going to probably start doing a lot more with the CPAs, educating them on the idea of getting into someone that's 45 or 50 and giving them some, like, a runway and timing out the contributory model we're going to use, and then timing it with the other ancillary I call them weapons in our arsenal, like an 831B captive. And that's where the owner can have his own captive insurance company. And when they do that, it covers issues that the big workers' comp premium, the health insurance, the big liability packages. There's little things that can hurt the business owner that aren't those great big claims. There could be, ransomware on the computer. There could be 100 bad Yelp reviews. I mean, reputation. There could be changes in legislation, changes in zoning on their buildings, changes in technology. There could be a lot of things that happen to a small business owner it'll interrupt their business. And if they don't, and they're already paying, they're already self-insuring that. They're already, if something comes up and it's going to be $50,000, they got to come up with it somehow. But the 831B captive allows them to insure that on a normal, like a property casualty model, but within their own captive. They don't, and they pay the premiums to it, which are deductible from the corporation. And they may own the corporation, they may own the captive inside the corporation or outside, or a family trust or something. But how they own it depends on how part of their end purpose, whether they are going to pass it in the family or whether they're going to sell it, if they're going to sell it in 3 years or 15 years. So there's a lot of these other vehicles that come into play now in this marketplace today. And they're all coming about in a positive manner.
Kelly, if I could have you, for the participants, so they're listening for the next 30, 45 minutes is really specific. What size company, kind of what type of company do you see as the most relevant for this structure, so that they're not like throwing spaghetti at the wall out there in the world trying to find it? They've got a listening for the size company, type of company for this structure.
I'll deal with the market first. The market is pretty much wide open. You can't do law firms. There has to be a different structure there because they're the way they treat themselves in terms of who can be an owner of a law firm. There's some gray area where if there's a larger medical, dental, chiropractor practice with multiple practitioners, good staff, we can structure something around that. But the big marketplace has always been contractors, real estate, not real estate investor. That's a whole different situation. But contractors, engineering, architecture, restaurant chains, hospitality. They have 2 or 3, Ramada Inns or something like that. Mostly middle-sized companies. Once they get too big, then they're really looking at private equity or merging in with a company that owns them out of Singapore or something like that. And we do run into that a lot. And so I'd say that probably you want to have at least a 5 million value. And to go along with that, because there's a capacity maximum or a percentage of payroll factor in the amount of contribution you can make. You want to be you want to have a few $1 million in payroll. Because, for instance, if there's $1 million profit, and we want to just only target that with just the ESOP, not the captive or anything else. If we're doing a vanilla version of trying to allocate enough deduction to offset that $1 million profit, that requires a $4 million payroll. Because just like pensions and everything else, we're capped at 25%. So $1 million of stock contribution wipes out the tax on that other, the number of the company, the profit that they're making.
But this is not a concept to start doing walks and talks into strip malls unless you know that they are part of a multiple chain of a locally established franchise, so to speak. That could work, but generally this is not, you don't go to the kiosk at the mall and say, hey, do you want an ESOP? No, that's not going to work. It has to be a more substantial business than just one location, essentially. Or a manufacturer, or of course, as you mentioned, a medical group, or you mentioned a caveat for the law firm, but we're not looking at, small mom and pop, the one owner convenience store type of a thing. There's other planning that can be done for that, which is a lot simpler.
Yep.
and far less expensive. Now, just real quick, just to show that the time frame, if I remember right, the leveraged ESOP, which is what you said the majority of the market is, I think that's for someone who's trying to exit their business, like I think under 5 years. I would,
Well-
that's a quicker time frame, I would believe, right?
Yeah, that is one where if you could ask the owner, he wants out tomorrow. But just to put just to put all the mechanics in place and vetting the people and, you know, having the team get assembled takes probably a few months. And then just start putting all the groundwork in and you know, getting the lending and all that stuff. That's another couple months minimum. So that I don't think I've seen a leveraged ESOP come together in less than 6 months. And then in most cases, they're going to want to have, you know, a transition team, you know, of management people and the owner to be around for a year or two. I mean, just to show continuity to the customers, not shake up the internal, you know, situation with the families and the employees. So generally, even a rushed leveraged ESOP probably is going to take a year or more.
And so what we're going to be talking about a little bit later, especially with the case study, is something that's going to take a minimum of 5 years we're looking at. And
Right.
so this is a longer term, more of a planning approach rather than last second, let's hurry up and get you out. So because, you know, maybe you got some sort of illness and you want to get out of the business right away. I'm just looking at, because there's a different strategic mindset behind what you do, taking a longer term approach, which also lowers the fees and the cost of doing it, is my understanding.
Yes. The typical leveraged ESOP, it'll probably cost at least 150,000 with all the fees. And I've seen them go as high as the cases that I see, 200,000-300,000. There's some of them up. I mean, that's a much larger company, but they can get pretty complex. And a lot of it depends on how they get the money, you know. And I mean, they can always make it simple and just do senior debt at their Wells Fargo or, you know, whatever bank they bank with. They can always get the senior debt there. And if they get 40-50% and they're willing to carry back the rest of it and not go after mezzanine or anything else, that shortens the time frame quite a bit. And but the fees are still, they'll keep the fees lower because there won't be as much private equity money coming in, and the people that are out there, the investment bankers that are seeking the funds above the senior debt, they're not going to have to do as much work. But it still ends up cheaper than a business broker. That's one thing that the marketplace needs to understand is you compare a business broker that, like, the guy says, okay, I want to sell, I don't care about the capital gains, and he hands it over to a business broker. They're going to pay as much to a business broker structure as they are to do a leveraged ESOP. And under the business broker, they're not going to save the 40% capital gains, and they might lose half their employees. You know, the business broker finds another guy that wants to buy it. He has his people. He has his trusted CFO and everything else. And there can be people displaced, you know, on a regular sale. And the people that, you know, are concerned on an ESOP, they have some concern for their employees. And those people, for the most part, got them there over a 10, 20, 30-year period. So they hate to see those people, you know, without a job 3 weeks after they walk out. So did you want to go through the website anymore on anything else?
I think we're good. I just hit share and hopefully we're seeing Acme Corporation down.
Yeah, obviously that's not the name of the company. This is an actual company we did a little over a year ago. And it was a construction company. It's related to the oil industry, and they're back east. But I don't, you know, Brian likes the Roadrunner, so that's the name we put on there. Let's go into the next slide. See, when we sit down with a business owner, we go through what they want to do, and these were in those categories. These were the values that owner wanted to. He wanted out over about a 10-11 year period. He's in his mid 50s. he's very, very employee oriented, very employee oriented. He's just, they're loyal to him, and he had some issues that we had to deal with insurance, underwriting, but we were able to get some good, ratings for him. A couple of years before we worked with him, he'd been flat out declined by everybody on the market. And so when we set this all up, we take into account how it has to take his goals with what is in the industry. Let's go to the next slide. Because in reality, these numbers move around a little bit, but for the most part, over the years, you see roughly 15 to 25% effectively transfer, whether it's inside with the family or whether it's finding an appropriate buyer. I mean, even in the old years, there's a lot of companies that he just kept working till they carry him out on his shield, or they take a price less than they want to. But what's happening now in this current marketplace is we have this silver tsunami, which is the term that was coined for the baby boomers that are exiting. And there's still another 10 to maybe 12 years of baby boomers, which is going to, there's more of a glut of our group of people that are putting their business in the market. So instead of, 5 a year, a silly number, but instead of 5 a year, we're seeing 15 a year. And what they're going to have is they're not going to be buyers for a lot of them. So that being recognized by a lot of the think tanks in Washington, both conservative and, progressive, they're saying that basically, employee ownership is a way through this without having to have, somebody my age trying to find a buyer for the value that I think the business is worth. And so a lot of these, there's been more ESOPs because of that, and because of because of what's happening with taxes. So this one, are there any questions on this? Because a lot of times we don't always see this stuff out in the marketplace. A lot of the statistics are coming from groups that work around the ESOP and the transition ownership, like the Exit Planning Institute, the Business Enterprise Institute. A lot of the exit strategy companies do these statistics to help out, knowing how to manage the company to prepare it for the exit.
Real quickly, Kelly, that last slide is really damning, I think, in terms of business owners' thought processes with how their future is going to look. And it's not that they're ignorant or anything, or stupid. It's just they're so damn busy being successful, right? And it seems like, the ideal time to position the sale of the business with the owner, whether it's an ESOP or anything else, is probably at least 3 to 5 years ahead of the anticipated event to get the right potential financing, buyers, tax structures. There's a time limit, or you'll speak about this later, but there's a structure, there's a tax entity structure that really works best with your model, and they need 5 years, right, to make that happen. So if you have business owner clients who are approaching you and saying, I'd like to sell my company this year, gosh, I mean, it could be a really tough conversation in terms of the ESOP if they haven't put some pieces together ahead of time. So the earlier you can get in front of them, talk about these things, whether it's ESOP or any other exit technique, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Because you also have, in most cases, you also want to sell the life insurance. You want to get it in funds under management. And so the time span to help the instruments within our industry help their situation, the longer the better. There's not a lot of front loaded stuff that has heavy values up front. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. We call it a fully insured financial infrastructure. And the reason is, besides, setting it up to be more sure of getting the financing, the banking, the accounting, the valuations, the younger they are, the more likely they are to be insurable. If we involve the captive, we're filling the little gaps that fall through the big property casualty packages that are out there. So, the asset protection involved, and model, if done correctly, there's almost no risk to where they are, where they have been before. And one of the things that happened to us within the last couple of years is the gentleman that used to be one of the top ESOP evaluation people in the Department of Labor. You know, they go out and they look for ESOPs that are done incorrectly. Then they litigate and make sure it's done better for the rights of the employees and the transition. When he looked at our model, he's now in private practice, and we engage him in a lot of our cases. But when he looked at our model, he said, "You guys are bulletproof," because the scenario I painted on earlier in the when you got all the attorneys coming together and everybody's doing everything transaction minded, there's gaps, there's things that people don't catch. And in our process, we're very thorough to make sure that there's reinforcement for every plank that they're going to step on that bridge out the door, you know, leaving their business. So let's go through steps.
I actually just got, okay, well, first, Brian, I don't know what's happening there. But I did get a comment that, or a question. A privately owned firm has an ESOP for 20 years future target. How is the value of company stock calculated?
Every year, we, in our model, I mean, some people skip it to do it every second and third year. We have an independent valuation firm. There's a lot of firms out there that's all they do is business valuations. And not all of them do ESOPs, because ESOP has the highest fiduciary responsibility for evaluation. So there's over the last 35 years, I've been vetting all the different, you know, third-party administrators for the ESOP, valuation firms, et cetera. And what we do is we go in ahead of time with the first valuation to establish how much each share of stock is worth. And if there's multiples of EBITDA, there's actually like 30 different calculation models, and the ones that the IRS uses, you know, multiples of EBITDA, discounted factor of profit, et cetera. Those are methods of establishing what that company's worth. And then we're finding a lot of times that we have to redo their docs because they've only allocated 100 shares. You know, and you really need to have it, because it doesn't matter how many you allocate in your corporate documents. They should have 1 million, because you don't want to have a partial share be a value for a contribution. You want to be able to say, okay, this person gets 5 allocations of shares, this one gets 2, this one gets 8, because of their income and what percentage of the payroll they are. So the way we get that established is we get the initial valuation that's done for the initial documents and the IRS determination letter and the filing and everything else. And then we do review valuations every year on the anniversary of the plan. And when they do that, you know, they look at the financials, and then they go back and they do how many shares of stock. And in most cases in the ESOP range, the shares go up continually. Now, the people later, like if they're like 60 years old and they've been in the plan for over 10 years, they can actually request a diversification. They can say, hey, I want to move some of my employer stock over to General Motors. And they're allowed to do that. And that's a separate process.
Very cool. Yeah, because, you know, one of the big downsides of a privately owned company is you don't have a ticker symbol. You can't track your stock pricing all the time. So there's got to be some sort of valuation. And, you know, just doing it once a year, I think that meets all the fiduciary requirements, I would believe.
Yeah. And believe it or not, a lot of the ESOP people out there aren't doing them yearly. They're saying, let's just do it every other year. Well, that could be a lawsuit waiting. You know, you don't want to have, if somebody leaves the business, and let's say they leave under negative situations, they try to file a workers' comp claim and you fired them, they're not going to be happy. And they're going to leave, and you're going to give them X dollars based on $20 a share. And it's worth 30. Well, if you've got a yearly valuation tracking it, the court's most likely going to go with the company, because they've applied a fiduciary process. But if they're doing spotty valuations, it opens them up. So that's why an airtight structure is more important.
Perfect. He responds, thank you. So we could go forward.
Yeah. Okay, so here we have the corporation, and currently they're working, they're paying, they're a very profitable company. This last year and a half, not quite as much, because of closing down like the XL pipeline and a bunch of other pipelines and drilling and stuff. And they're not an oil, but they're a construction company based on the oil industry. So they got, we have to respond to that during the year. And whereas we put the life insurance in the first year without premium financing, there's a good possibility that this time around we may have to put that policy into a financing structure. Okay, go ahead and hit the next slide. That's where we're dealing with the IRS. And go ahead, hit the next slide. So now what we do is we talked to them, we went through everything with their banker. Their banker was really concerned about, if we're gonna, what's gonna happen to the valuation, or he was concerned also if we're gonna premium finance on the life insurance, because their bank is really into people keeping a lot of money in the bank. This particular banker was very conservative. He didn't want to see anything inhibit the valuation of the company to the banking relationship. And by doing that trust, now we contribute the stock. Go ahead to the next one. And in this case, I think in the next one too, the issued stock going into it, we moved the numbers down a little bit on this case to make it easier to transfer. But we did do less stock in the first year. Go ahead to the next slide. By contributing that stock, now TERC stands for tax exempt retained capital. That's our trademark for it. So by having that amount of stock go into the ESOP, we eliminated his tax for that year. And then what we also are doing is we established the 831B captive to where they actually pay a premium to that captive. And I think in this case, we had him personally on the captive, didn't we, Brian?
Yep.
Yeah.
Another important point that I want to bring up real quick about the ESOP, especially our structure, what Kelly just mentioned, our structure allows for a lot of flexibility with the business owner. So we're meeting with these business owners, like Kelly said, every year. And one year we may contribute a certain amount of stock. The next year, they may not have been as profitable. So our structure allows for a lot of flexibility, and that's important.
Same thing with the captive. The captive, it's not a fixed premium. Like what they'll do is they'll go in and do an analysis, including their existing property casualty package. And for instance, a large oral surgery place I have up in San Luis Obispo, he's on his fourth year now, and his first time through, his underwriting would allow him to do 880,000 of premium based on these 17 risks that they pick out of the 70 something risks that are available. And he says, no, I'll just do 400. I can't do more. I can't do 750 right this year. I can only do 450. Well, what they also did is to get him up to the 750, they financed the balance of it. It was the same structure as premium finance for life insurance. We can premium finance for the captive. Well, over the last 3 years, we're no longer financing the captive, and his underwriting has gone much higher. Now, what he did do, though, is he made a claim because of COVID. Because if we remember, everything got shut down, especially someone's gonna have their hands in your mouth for 3 hours at a time. So he was shut down for 4 months during the height of the paranoia. Now, it helped. We got the PPP loans and all that kind of stuff, but the analysis that we did still allowed him to go much higher. And he did file a claim for the COVID issue. Oddly enough, that captive company no longer identifies with paying for pandemics anymore. They do pay for things that are similar, but they've removed that from their 73 risks. So, and again, as Rich brought up, we can modify both of those at the same time. With the life insurance, we can either pay the premium or finance it, or do extra things on the premiums in terms of raising or lowering the premium. So, and there's two advantages. If he owns the captive inside the company, does everybody understand a captive? Because I want to make sure that we
Let's
do.
define it. We might as well define it.
Yeah, the captive, it's just like a regular insurance company. And captives have been around for a long time. They call them 831A. And those are offshore and they're huge and they're expensive to set up. But those are actually for the workers' comp. They're for the medical. They're for all the large risks. And those captives usually put like all of the construction companies in one captive, all the engineering firms in one captive, all the Mexican restaurants in one captive. And they participate that way in their industry pools. These captives, the 831B, was done to be simplified. When they first put them in, very simple rules, real clear, but they had like I think it was 1,000,001 was their limitation up until 2 years ago. And they moved it up to 2.3 million cap per year premium. But they made other things, they made certain things more lenient, and they also put some more restrictions on them on percentages of the pool and all that kind of stuff. But if you pay a premium to that captive after it's gone through its underwriting and the risk management, and they come back and say, okay, you can put 2 million into this captive with these 43 risks, and this risk is 10,000, this one's 100,000, this one's 18,000, and you can pick and choose. It's just like picking on a car insurance or that kind of stuff, and they're done in the same way. The good thing on captives is that they're deductible on earned income. The negative is, and we don't do this, but up until this last change in the captive law, expanding it to 2.3 million from the 1.1, a lot of people were using them as wealth transfer. They would have the kids' dynasty trust own the captive. So as the owner of the company, we're transferring $1 million of deductible premium out of the company into the captive. They were reducing their taxable estate for estate planning and putting the amount of money available for the kids, grandkids, to pull money out to pay the estate, whatever leftover estate taxes were due. So it was kind of slick, not what captives were intended to do in any way, shape, or form. And it got hit a little bit with some audits. But at the same time, when the kids or grandkids or whoever took the money out, they'd have to pay capital gains tax. Now, in the realm of things, to deduct it supposedly on earned income and pay tax 20 years later on capital gains with tax-free growth in the meantime, it was a viable option. But question, was that a question?
Oh, sorry, I just agree with you because I'd rather pay capital gains than ordinary income.
Yeah, and have the opportunity cost for 20 years,
Right.
tax-free growth. But on one of the cases where we have the captive, actually for that doctor, the captive's in his BDIT, his beneficiary defective inheritance trust. But in this case, if the corporation owns the captive, when the corporation sells the company to the ESOP later, the captive gets included in the 1042 exchange. So they're eliminating the capital gains tax, the normal capital gains tax that the grandkids would pay. They're including it in the 1042 exchange and eliminating the capital gains on it if it's part of the captive sale with the corporation to the trust. So there's different ways of owning the captive based on the goal. Most of them right now, they're all going to be outside. We're not sure what the vehicle is going to be till we do more, finally, finding out with the client. But in that case, because like if somebody is setting up the company thinking, okay, my kids are going to take over, well, the money in the captive might be part of the money to buy back some of the stock that's been contributed to the ESOP to put ownership back into the family. And so there's a lot to work with on the captive market. And that's part of what we're finding is that as people don't want to put all their stock into the ESOP in 5 years, they want to start targeting an exit in 5 or 10 years, but they want to have stock outside that they can still sell to the ESOP on their own and get the capital gains treatment on it personally as they exit. Let's go to the next slide.
Captive premium payment.
Yeah, there's the premium payment. Now, part of what, and the reason we put that 0 for 2021 is one of the things that I'm going to address later and really hammer on is that the Secure Act and the CARES Act is letting us go back into 2021 to do an ESOP, even though we're in 2022, because normally captives and all the instruments that they use have to be put in place by the end of 12/31 for that active year, for that tax year. What we're doing now is we're able to go back. So we're including, if we're like, we have a company down near San Diego right now that we're trying to get their attention and have them have their CPA is recommending that they do what we're recommending. And we're trying to get it where she understands this new part that I just fully vetted, like within the last month or so. So that I'll cover that in more detail later. Now we put the corporate owned life insurance in place. In some cases, the insurance might be used for estate planning. And so we may have some different ownership structures on the shareholder, but all the key man policies and stuff are corporate owned. And that also, because of the values inside of it, it helps to offset for the calculations for the repurchase obligation of buying the shares of stock back from the departing employees for the amount that they're vested. The life insurance is funding for the repurchase obligation. When I first started doing these in this method, before the captives and stuff were more complicated, when I was doing the simpler model, it was like, look, business owner A and B, you guys, you have a buy-sell agreement. You haven't funded it because you don't want to pay the premiums on the life insurance. But if I put the stock over here in this trust and save you the tax dollars, you can now do what you should be doing anyway. I mean, without a show of hands necessarily, I mean, how many times do you walk into a business owner with 2 or 3 partners and they don't even have a business, they don't have a buy-sell agreement. And if they do, it's not funded with life insurance, or it might be a term policy. Yeah, really. So my earlier model wasn't just to generate the insurance sale, it was to give them the money to buy the life insurance that they should be buying anyway. So that was the earlier, simpler model. And let's go down to the next step.
Yeah, purchasing the corporate owned life insurance, whatever amount to be determined. Now, here we go.
Now, in this particular case, there's one primary owner. There was a family member that was a partial owner, but that was taken care of with the process. And then he had, I think it was a total of 13 key people at the beginning that we were going to try to get insured, but one was 67. And so we had to figure out something else, because he was going to be there for 6 more months. He would not vest any stock or anything else. And then one guy, 2 of them got declined. And so we ended up insuring the owner and 10 key people, but the premium, it wasn't all base, but the premium, Brian, when the premium was like $1.7 million, something like that.
For the whole group, it was about $1,050,000. A third of that went to the who had severe health challenges we had to work through. There was a economies of scale on that one with such a large group willing to give this owner a table 4 at a big mutual company, which was a great deal for this guy. I mean, he was 6'3", 350 pounds, sleep apnea, all the medications,
Diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol,
everything.
yeah, full on CPAP. I mean, he was a previous lineman at Ohio State, I think he said. So
Yeah.
in terms of additional insurance, we're going to wait a year and try to go through again, because he's still trying to lose more weight, and with that improve the cholesterol and stuff like that. So I think we did 10 million on him. We're looking to do another 10 million, if I'm not mistaken. And he's buying companies, and part of the money that we're saving him, like he bought a company that was worth probably $2 million just in a garage sale. That they're walking away with $2 million in assets. I think he bought it, what, 400,000? So we're giving him investment capital to add to his kingdom. So any questions at this point?
No, at this point, I mean, the bottom line I'm looking at is that, yes, there's a lot of moving parts, but the idea is use the money you would have sent to the IRS, use the tax code, find the deductions, free up capital, and do the planning you should be doing. And essentially without taking any more money out of your pocket, because you would have sent the same money to the IRS anyway.
Right.
And creating a better working environment for employees, and giving them a piece of the pie in addition to how it helps out typically the owner, right? We all think that, it's all about the owner, but the employees are important too, because they got the owner to where he's at today, especially in this case. He's very kumbaya, and I love my employees and that such.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
he's a great guy to work
Does
with.
anyone have any questions on this? Kelly, check in for questions, because this is a really great slide. There's a lot of moving parts on this slide.
And there's no questions at this point. I'm looking at the chat, looking at the comments section. Nothing's happening so far, but there's a lot to take in. It's kind of hard to know what to ask when we're just kind of being exposed to this for the first time. So believe me, I get it. And like I said at the beginning, it's like learning a new language. You just have to experience it some more. And so one of the advantages of having this recorded is you can go back, rewind, watch it again, and you might come up with some questions or something. And of course, when you have questions, don't ask me. You need to ask Kelly, ask Rich, ask Brian. They're the ones that know and can find those resources. I'm still learning this, but I think I'm getting a little bit better handle on it. Don't ask me about the intricacies, the little details and stuff. I don't know that stuff yet. And by the way, everybody that's watching this, if you're not a little bit scared about this, I mean, do not try to do this on your own. Okay, you don't want to try to attempt to do this on your own. You might want to learn how to have some conversation starters, but the whole idea is you bring in the experts, you bring in the people that know this stuff. You don't want to try to attempt it on your own. I would not want to see that lawsuit of screwing that up.
A lot of my time over the last 35 years in this market has been developing knowing which attorneys know what they're doing. I mean, on this plan, one of the negatives on this plan is that there's a couple of different law firms that I have attorneys that I work with, and this man's banker or CPA or somebody knew of an attorney close to him back in Indiana that was with the same law firm as another person I use all the time out here in LA. And normally this kind of legal documents would come in at about 12 to 18,000 based on complexity and a few other things. That includes filing for the, IRS determination letter and the documents and everything. And this attorney that we ended up with, same law firm, supposedly an ESOP attorney, I think we're at 30,000 in fees, because he's like, every time he picks up the phone, he's on the clock. And we've tried to have a couple of attitude adjustment discussions with him, extreme attitude adjustment calls, and he's slowed it down a little bit, but he's still double the fee. So the result is we'll never use him again, and he's going to be removed as we go, because there's going to be additional documents down the road that are going to be on his client. So going through that process hundreds of times. I mean, I've probably worked on 1,000 different ESOP structures that have, some end up being ESOP, some don't, but going through it and vetting the CPAs, vetting that you kind of know who to go to. And it's not always the same person, because a situation may determine this attorney or this CPA or this third-party administrator. And now that we're engaging the fiduciary on all the cases, it helps. I mean, but it has its challenges, but every case is a substantial premium. And we're, like I said, the activity, this new era mentality I'm taking into the ESOP marketplace because of our model that literally we've checked with every major law firm and every CPA firm. Nobody's doing what we're doing. And the same thing for the reason that the former DOL guy that's now a fiduciary on his own, he said, and he looked at every ESOP in the United States. And he said, nobody's doing this. So it's complicated, but the rewards are great, both for the business owner, the employees, the community, and, the producers that are working on it. So let's go to the next slide.
Oh, we got the safe harbor up there.
Key point. History on the 401k. Okay, 401k has been around for almost forever, like ERISA. A lot of them, if they don't want to do the testing, which can invalidate a plan. I mean, you can roll out a 401k, and if you're not doing a safe harbor, I'll touch on that because it took me a long time to understand 401ks. If they may not get enough of the rank and file, it could be a top heavy plan, and then you have to give everybody's check back. So over the last few decades, they started doing a safe harbor of putting in 3%. And whether it's a match or it's what's the term, I guess, where they're doing only the 3%.
Yeah, just a stated contribution, whatever it is, regardless of your own participation. I'm vaguely familiar enough with qualified plans in that arena, but the safe harbor, it essentially protects the top hat, the key employees to be able to contribute their available maximum without having it refunded.
Exactly. And so the existing of our type of ESOP, not the leveraged ESOP, remember, that's a sale transaction. On the contributory pre-leveraged capitalized structure, we can actually, that justifies being the equivalent of a safe harbor. So like in this case, I don't think it was as big, but we're working on another case right now where the payroll is so large that the 3% is like $130,000 a month. So just by installing our model, just doing our thing, we're going to save him $100 and something thousand a month in safe harbor fees. And it's going to be a safe harbor 401k. So they keep the safe harbor. Everybody can put in what they want to, and the corporation's not mandated to put in that 3% just off the top.
They could revitalize that previous contribution or maintenance fee, whatever that was. They could revitalize that and use that in other ways.
Yeah.
We got another question. It said COLI is not a typical policy. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, other than I know that this is corporate owned life insurance. It's not like you're buying it on an individual basis, and you're buying it for business purposes, as outlined there on the slide.
There might be some confusion because I hear a lot of people talk about COLI and BOLI as if it's transferable. COLI stands for corporate owned life insurance. And it's an ownership issue. BOLI is a bank owned life insurance, and it's done under a different structure. It's a different market and different products. So that if that's what you're talking about, whoever brought the comment, that's accurate. The BOLI is not a normal policy. The COLI can be the same 100,000 whole life or whatever IUL, but it's owned by the corporation as opposed to being owned by the insured.
And typically there'd be some sort of agreement or arrangements that spell the responsibilities of the parties to the policies, something like that, as opposed to individual policies. Whoever you name as a beneficiary is whoever gets the proceeds.
Yeah. A long time ago, I was doing a lot of work in the non-qualified deferred comp arena. When I was at Northwestern, I was working with the Todd organization, and I started working with the Clark Bartis group for a while. And the corporate-owned life insurance encompasses the key man element. It underwrites a promise for retention of the key person. Like you hear deferred comp, you hear SERPs, all that kind of. You hear all these different things. Supplemental income, those are under the COLI structure. And it's basically they're allocating the amount of death benefit that's required to fund for the key man. And if there's a promise like you stay with me for 10 years and I'll give you $10,000 a year for 10 years up and above pension, ESOP, Social Security, that's funding that. And it has to be an unfunded promise. You can't dictate how that money is going to be allocated, because then it becomes not tax deferred. It's immediately taxable, just like a bonus structure, like earlier, one of the earlier questions.
Details. I remember that from my studies years ago, that there's some detail that's why it has to be considered unfunded in order to get certain advantages. it sounds weird. It's kind of like saying I'd rather have an IRS qualified plan than IRS non-qualified plan. But once you get past the terminology of what the stuff does, then the benefits make more sense.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think we're getting into the number side of it, which is, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, the components. This is like a 30,000 foot overview of the 3 different components on this particular case. We did the ESOP, and we have to follow the guidelines of the IRS and the ERISA congressional guidelines. On the captive, in this case, he's owning the captive privately. Excuse me, I got something. And then on the COLI, on the life insurance, we're structuring it in 2 different ways. The policy on him is not corporate owned, but the policy on the key people is corporate owned. And the language of the executive benefits, it can be tailored to all 10 different people. You might have 10 different agreements with each of the people having a longer insurance period, longer retirement period, higher numbers. They don't necessarily have to be, they have probably maximums because of underwriting, like multiples of income. Like you can't insure somebody for 50,000 a year and put a $22 million policy on them. There's a lot of the normal guidelines that you have to adhere to, but it still talks about keeping the insurance structured to solve a particular need. And as you go through this, now the nice part about this, since he's going to own his own life insurance and we're heavily funding it, is that when he finally steps away, the insurance that's been purposed for all these needs will be paid up, and then we repurpose it. We repurpose it for estate planning or for retirement. So as we do the review with him each year, and actually we're talking to him monthly actually, but as we do the review with him over the next 10, 11 years, we're going to be modifying that. We might be targeting it where we're doing things more targeted towards cash value for retirement income. He has tons of other assets. He has a very complex estate. So we might allocate it for like not taking the income from it and just let the death benefit continue to accelerate. So it's there for the estate tax purposes. And a part of that's depending on not just his decisions, but what Congress does. I mean, like right now, we're all girding our loins for 2025, where the 11 million is going to drop back under a safe, under a sunset provision, back down to maybe 5 million. We're not even sure what's going to do, but we do know that the implication will be that there's going to be a lot more estate tax liability liquidity planning needed post 2025. Now, if we can put it in place now, when the person's, 55 instead of 59, and they, less insurability and all that kind of stuff, and more equity by the time we need it, then, and we can fund it with offsets, then he's better off. His family's better off too. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. Any questions?
You mentioned the key person stuff, and just to remind that key person benefits can be discriminatory, which is a different word to saying you can customize it for each person's role, each person's contribution to the business, so you can customize it. And so, discriminatory sounds like a bad word, just like qualified and non-qualified, but you can customize it. So that's what you were mentioning earlier, because you can customize it based on age and contribution and whatever else.
Yeah, he's got a couple 60-somethings in there, and that presented some challenge, but we were able to get around it. So
yeah, and another point on the insurance side, what we find too, working with the underwriters and companies that know our structure, we're able to get some higher insurance coverage amounts for the owners, the key people, not your 20 times multiple of income type stuff. I mean, we're able to, because of our structure, show the increased value of the business when we install our different strategies. So that's important too.
Yeah, another item to add just on the captive, Kelly kind of covered how it worked, but there's another added benefit if you're a registered rep. After the money's been in the captive and in reserve for at least a year, typically, now you can manage those dollars to the client's risk profile and, design an investment strategy inside of that captive. So it's not just sitting in cash for the next 20 years. You can actually add some inflationary growth to it. So that's a nice thing that we have access to as well. And if you're registered, you can do that as well. So I just wanted to add that one little element.
I mean, if you have somebody that is really like enjoying AUM, imagine one client giving you $2 million a year per year
Per year.
to manage. So
Oh, don't tell me. Okay.
Yeah, so-
I are for an IA, so that would be another way to enhance my total book of business.
yeah, 10 years out, you're managing 20 million plus the growth on what you've done over the 20 million. So it benefits everybody in a lot of different ways. Let's go through these. I mean, if somebody wants to get granular, these are like the overview we're showing is like a 30,000 foot, and these slides brought down like this is more like 10,000 foot level. But these are the normal steps. Now there's a lot of sub steps to each one of these and different entities and stuff, but these are the steps we do. And then we do the employee meetings and let them know what the benefits are, the contracts and the ESOP itself and everything, and answer questions like someone's 62 and they want to step away in 2 years. Well, they're not going to vest anything. And so we have to work around that with something with the owner. He has to set like a phantom stock or stock appreciation rights or something like that, or add more to the life insurance. I mean, it's got the flexibility to address each point of
But to
opportunity.
equalize the benefit. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so here we are. Now, the reason it's 2 slides like this is what I mentioned earlier, and I'll drill down. If you have a client and it's, I wish I could have had all the ducks lined up to be comfortable to do this presentation 2 months earlier, because we're already in March. We're already having some companies filing tax returns. But under the CARES Act, Secure Act, we can, with an ESOP on this, not the leverage ESOP, it doesn't matter. But on this particular ESOP, we can go back into last year for the guy, or the guy or girl, whoever owns the business, for the business owner. And if their payroll's $20 million, we can do a $5 million deduction for last year with paper, with stock certificates. That's huge, because that's never been the situation before. I mean, in the past, defined benefit plans had up until you file taxes, but that just gives you time to engage the actuarial guy to do the study to tell you what your new maximum funded required contribution is going to be of cash into that pension plan. But this is huge, and if you can get the eyes of the attorney or the business owner, the CPA especially, the CPA can look like a hero by you introducing this concept to them, and where they were getting ready to recommend buying 16 new trucks for 179 depreciation values. They don't have to do that. I mean, we've literally walked in on a client that has a construction company. He says, I have 5 more trucks than I need now. I don't need any more 6,000-pound vehicles that I do a 179 deduction for. But what else can I do? This is a gift from Congress. And so that's why we tried to get this meeting as early as we could. And we just couldn't pull it off any earlier because I was still getting tax verifications from different people to know that we weren't saying something we couldn't say. And so we can't do anything captive retroactive because, well, one, it takes a while to get a captive because there's a lot of underwriting and risk management stuff involved, and it's a cash contribution. So they're talking about retirement plans, and with the ability to do a tax deduction for last year is huge, because now all of a sudden, whether it's a $1 million deduction or a $10 million deduction, you've got that money right now that they don't have to pay taxes on now. So what we're trying to do with one company is we're talking about putting $2.5 million of stock into last year's ESOP, and then immediately taking that $2.5 million that we're taking away from the profit they have to pay and putting that in the captive. So we're funding the captive with the TERC, the tax exempt retained capital created by last year's deduction that we're doing now. So it's a real boon to opportunities.
Now,
And
if I may, Kelly, I interrupt you because I want to get everybody's attention, because when we talked about this like about 2 or 3 weeks ago, you said this is the equivalent of asking a widow how much life insurance do you want on your deceased spouse. You know, because you're able to go back and create a deduction you otherwise wouldn't be able to create and capitalize on it today, and and keep that benefit, and essentially creating a deduction, because you're just issuing the stock paper to contribute. And you mentioned this before. This is not a cash tax deduction. This is a tax code deduction.
yeah, it's code versus checks versus cash. And I mean, right now I've got a handful. Huh?
CPAs get this. I was say when the CPA gets this, make sure you're on Zoom and look at their face when
Yeah.
they get it. It's like, you'll know they've never done this before or seen it, and they get it. They go, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. So
I'm getting comments. Barry Bretton says this is great stuff. And another question is, so an amended return is filed for 2021.
well, what we're doing now is
they weren't filed yet. So.
Yeah, if we're saying file an extension. I mean, put it off till June. I mean, because it'll take a couple of weeks to get everything put together. But yeah, if with the company we're doing down near San Diego, it's actually right. It's just north of the border from Tijuana. They have a high growth situation, but what we're doing is we're going to give them 2.5 for last year, fund the captive for this year, and then do the 2.5 again. And they're going to have a $7+ million deduction like within 90 days. And so their whole deduction for the 2 years of the business is $7.5 million. And it was all initiated by a paper deduction retroactively into last year. And so, and if you roll it forward, the impact is incredible. So from 22 and beyond, we kept the paper transaction in last year, so it kind of roughly gives them a $300,000 to mess with on top of funding the captive this year. So they've got the money from the tax savings or the profit offset from last year to go into the captive for this year. And then we're going to start making their stock contributions a little larger to go along with their growth. And they're looking at 5 years out, maybe 7 years. But in that time period, we're going to save them like $20 million. It's amazing. Let's go to the next slide. Now, here is 5 years out on that projection. The current value is back 5 years ago was $50 million. Assuming that there's a growth over the 5 years at what are we doing? We're doing a growth of 3%. So under the normal set, we're maxing the same yield on both boxes. This is us, and this is the one on the left is the generic run-of-the-mill sale. So it's going to go up to 57 million. Now they're going to sell it to Joe Blow or whoever. They're going to pay 22 million in capital gains taxes. And so they're going to have a net walk away of 35 million, almost 800,000. With our model, going back to the same 5-year period, same $50 million valuation back then, the same valuation today based on the company growth, but now from what they want to do and how we're designing it, we're reinvesting the TERC at the same 3%. We're matching the growth because they're going to reinvest it in the business. They're going to accelerate their growth. So the business is going to grow to 74 million instead of 57 million. And they're not going to pay the capital gains tax. So the walk away money under the generic typical sale is 35 million. Under ours, it's 74 million, but the equivalent of it is if they were paying taxes is 119 million. And that's huge. And what was it, what you mentioned to me before the thing, David, with how the Breakaway League talks about the capital?
In the Breakaway League, we talk a lot about the equivalent of how much money you need in a 401k to equate what you would be able to get out of a 10-pay life insurance policy for cash flow. And we call it capital equivalent value. And looking at your figures, because we were working on this yesterday, and I'm like, well, how would I quantify this as an equivalent rate of return? And I determined it would be called business valuation. What did I write down? Business evaluation equivalent, so BVE, and just doing a simple present value, future value. What would it be over 5 years? To not do this strategy, you'd have to have your business be valued at growth, the business value grow at 19.11% each year for 5 years, and have a guaranteed buyer to buy it at that higher amount. So you'd have to have both of those components in place to equate what you're doing on the tax exempt scale. So that was
That's a really powerful way to look at that, David. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't been doing that, and that's, thank you, Tom. Thank you, David, for doing that.
I'll thank Brian Bloom, CPA, for he created. He's got his books, Confessions of a CPA. Get all three; they're great. Brian, you owe me $10 for the endorsement.
Yeah,
okay.
Just send me the invoice. I'll pay you a beer.
But anyway, but no, that I mean, really, if you look at it like compared to any other stock market, or can you guarantee your business will be valued to over 20% a year by not doing this? You know.
Yeah. It's yeah, and that's I'm glad I'm going to steal that. So, but bottom line, it's a whole new era we're facing now, because again, 99.9% of the ESOPs that have been put in place over the last 45 years are leveraged ESOPs. And I got a notice, one of our associates, Eric Post, texted me today, and I guess the BRC at Guardian they're doing a thing yesterday and today on exit strategies, and they were bringing up ESOPs. I haven't sat in on it, but it's all leveraged. I asked him, are they doing anything with contributory? And he said, nope, it's all leveraged. And so and I ran the same thing with the guys at Mass Mutual and New York Life and all the other carriers. You know, whenever I have to educate them about this type of ESOP versus the historical, market part. And we have a new era, and the opportunities, because we're going to start doing CE credit things for CPAs and attorneys and everything else, and those guys are the gatekeepers. And there's going to be a lot of additional awareness. Well, there is additional awareness now. It's coming out of Congress, and in fact, the employee market, the Main Street Employee Ownership Act of 2019, which took effect in 2020, it had people on both sides of the aisle. I mean, extremes. I mean, you had Ron Johnson and guys that are really hardcore capitalistic pigs of the Republican wing, and then you had guys like Cory Booker. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
On the legislation.
There's close to 7,000 ESOPs currently today in the United States. So there's a lot of opportunity for all of us moving forward. States like Colorado are implementing certain benefits to ESOP ownership, and that's just a matter of time before it comes to California and other states. So there's a great opportunity right now.
And California to bring ownership to the employee level. I mean, I remember Kelly, you did this interview with Sandy Chastel, I don't know, a year or so ago, and bringing up that ownership to the employee level, I think was huge, and that's what the Democrats, typically for their agenda, they would love this.
Yeah, Reagan was huge on this. In fact, during Reagan's time period is when they added another thing to this for the lenders that do the lending for the leveraged ESOPs. They, under his acts, banks only had to declare 50% of their interest income on a leveraged ESOP as taxable. They got to keep half their interest income tax-free. Now that was later removed, I think, second term with Clinton. Maybe it fell into Bush. I don't know, but it was removed. Now they're talking about bringing it back, and they're talking about bringing it back with a lot of additional. I mean, when you have two different think tanks that are on opposite ends of the pole, I mean, the major think tanks inside the Beltway for Washington, D.C., and all the state legislators thinking the same thing. You mentioned Colorado. Ohio has been crazy on ESOPs too. They actually have an ESOP division within their government. And so you look at what's going on now, we're going to see a lot less pensions. We're going to see whatever's going to happen on 401k shakeouts with people. Can they still afford to do the safe harbor? You know, if you got a company that's been doing a safe harbor for 20 years and they stop doing it, the participation might drop off the end of the table. If they do that, they no longer have a 401k. And not that that's a loss, because you know there's a lot of software out there that shows you that 401k is not necessarily the best thing for people to put their money in, but that's irrelevant from a corporate mentality, from a business owner mentality, from an employee mentality, someone you're trying to recruit or somebody you're trying to hold on to. You know,
Paid to be as part of what you're offering, or you know, just it should be as expected as health insurance. You expect it at some level. But real quick, Michael Corrales asked, is there an employee minimum target payroll of 1 million? We just want to double check I guess the profile of the company.
well, we've had over the years, especially like 20 years ago when I was doing this primarily alone with Rich's help, and then we'd have people we know, we'd be sitting there at MDRT or wherever else talking about it. Well, I think I got a guy. Okay, so they come in, we do a case with them, and then that's their only case, and they just go off back to, you know, selling, you know, 529 plans or something. But when we did that, we were working with we were taking, I won't say almost any company we could do, but the idea was market share. We wanted to try to get cases on the books, and so we were going down as low as I think I had one company was like down near $1 million of payroll. And most of those companies have been a headache. We've had what do you call it, a gymnastics academy that makes a lot of money every 4 years when the Olympics start advertising, and they put their kids in there because they're going to have the next Nadia Comaneci or something. Well, that didn't happen this last year, and they were we're having to fold up their ESOP. They don't have the profits, anything else. The same thing with an escrow company. So they were going to go up, but then they didn't. They went down. So if it's too small of a company, besides the economies of scale of paying for the attorney and the CPA and the evaluation, we like to try. I mean, if you can look for a $4 or $5 million payroll, of an $8 to $10 million revenue, of 500,000 to $1 million as a minimum profit. I mean, I'm talking gross profit, not net profit. But if those are that's kind of like the schematics of the lower threshold, that won't be a headache for us to, you know, work, because it's your client and you're going to have to deal with the complaints more so than we would. So if you try to go too low, there's going to be more stress. And on top of that, if you got a guy with a $1 million payroll and a $250,000 profit, but it's going to cost him $25,000 to $30,000 to get it installed. He's eating up most of the available money that he would realize put in his pocket and or pay for the insurance and everything else with the fees to get it installed. Now, most of the fees are the first year, because after you get rid of the attorney drafting the $15,000, $20,000 fees, you've got the annual fee with the valuation, the annual fee with the third-party administrator. And those are a lot, you know, those are, you know, the TPA is going to charge you roughly $2,000 a year and $30 a person or something like that. And the valuation is going to drop from, say, 10,000 down to, say, 6, because the subsequent renewal valuations are less expensive because they've already done all the work to get everything put in up front and determined which of the 30 methods they're going to use. And then after that, it's just, you know, okay, instead of 8 million of revenue, it's 9 million. Instead of this much of payroll, it's this. And so it gets easier after the second year. But I would say look for a company with, 5 million of payroll and up, maybe 4. Look for a company with 500,000 of profit and up. Because remember, the profit's going to be what installs the case. Is also going to be what helps buy the life insurance and putting money in the captive and AUM and everything else. So, and we've got 6 people working on these cases, and so, everybody's got to feed their families. So it's nice that there are all these $1 million premiums, which were the stuff coming our way now. The phone calls I'm getting. I mean, I got a call in from an agent that I worked with 35 years ago. And he's got a car dealership, an Audi dealership, and they're doing 140 million a year. And he was referred to Rich and I from Pac Life, so obviously I want to probably go with Pac Life. But I mean, it's like try to keep it where it's good for the employer and good for us. Us meaning you and us.
And I got another question. This guy, but he's asking, can this be used by family offices who have subsidiaries in the U.S.? He's
Yes.
clarifying Asian family offices. And this is Sanjay asking that question.
Is it Tolani? Sanjay. Yes. In fact, one of the things that if you get your butt early back to Boston is one of the things I want to talk to you about at Roundtable. But we've gotten some cases coming to us from family offices. And in one particular case that you and I have talked about with Singapore person, not only is it good with the family office and doing this with it, because most family offices are going to have an attorney, a CPA, a investment guy, a real estate guy. If there's a viable company in there that the guy owns a machine place or they're making Reebok shoes for some distributor, I mean, that company is a viable company. And it has all the same guidelines, whether it's in, Jakarta or here, as long as the tax code of that country recognizes employee ownership. And that's spreading that's another thing. There's new countries coming on board every year that are developing employee ownership tax issues. And we have one with a whiskey company that just was brought to us that's going to go crazy. And we're going to we're being brought in by one of the people in the CPA, or no, the tax attorney. We're getting brought in by him into the family office structure.
Well, he responded, yes, Dad. So make
For
sure we
for everybody that knows all this little private joking we're doing, Sanjay Talani is this kid. I still think of him as a kid. He's like 30-something years old with a couple PhDs, and he's doing all sorts of seminars. And he took his family insurance agency from being just Dubai. He's spread it into 16 countries now, and I don't know how many hours he finds in a day to do stuff, but it's amazing. So if you have any younger agents that you want to bring into the business, get them inserted into his programs, because his books, his seminars, it's like I look at him and I forgot that stuff from my 10th year in business or my 20th year in the business. And he's putting it into some really good resources for everybody.
sizable YouTube channel. It's got about 85,000 subscribers. So you'll find them on YouTube, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So a little bit of plug there, and you can send me $50 later. Okay. All right. That's good.
One last question. Sanjay, is Peter going to be there? Is Grandpa going to be there? No
We'll
answer.
see if he responds. Okay. So I moved the slide a little bit. There's 207% more net proceeds. That's out of the equivalent values there. And so the next slide, here we go. Want to go through each one, or you just want me to?
Yeah, I mean, typically on an outside sale, they're haggling. And particularly with the silver tsunami, that's going to be a huge factor because there's going to be a lot more sellers and a lot less buyers. And even though private equity groups are starting to get involved with ESOPs, it's just one more negotiating tool on their behalf. So if a guy's going to try to sell their business on the traditional side, they're not going to get full market value. That's
Real quick,
not.
Sanjay said yes, he will be. So you got
Okay,
confirmation.
If you wonder who we're talking about, go to my Facebook, and Sanjay, myself, and Grandpa are there. So yeah, because the capital, if they sell it, I mean, because of the fact they're going to pay taxes, they're going to walk away, with, if it's a $10 million company and it's mostly gain, and they're going to pay $4 million in tax, the guy's going to walk away with $6 million minus cost of the structure of the purchase and stuff. So, I mean, the silver tsunami is going to have a lot of impact over the next 10 years. A lot of impact on traditional stuff. Yeah, they're going to have all the volatility involved in the interest rate risk. It's like a lot of, even on the traditional sales, there's that owner may be carrying back a lot of paper, and they're going to have a lot of negotiation that they have to do on that, because again, it's going to be a buyer's market. Oh, there. Okay, that's the bottom. Yeah, they may not even have a buyer. It may just be a lot of doors slamming shut. Yeah, we get the full market value, and a lot of times, in addition to the full market value, they get the tax savings. But because of that, now that's a person that's generally selling it under a leverage situation. If we get in there 5 years ahead of time, 10 years ahead of time, when the guy's 52 or something like that, you add in the growth on the captive outside the company, you add in the growth on the cash value of the insurance, and that becomes something serious, because we all of us contend every day with the people following Susie Orman and who's the other clown, what's his name, Dave Ramsey, and they're buying term, and you don't need term after 65 and stuff. Well, what happens is business owners do, and when they get to be 65, they sold their business, either way they sell it. In most cases, they're going to have to now go out. They've dropped the IRS credit from 11 down to 3.5, and they're going to have, between that 8 million and the 8 million on the spouse, they're going to have a $16 million higher net estate to be paying taxes on. So it's 65, 68, whatever they're going to sell the company, they got to go out and find a survivorship policy. At that age, at that likelihood of insurability, with fresh dollars not being tax subsidized, that's huge. That's huge. Go to the next one. Yeah, that's part of what we just said. The 831B captive, I mean, we have to be careful, because 831B captives are on the watch list. They've been so abused, and the IRS has not been very effective in their court fighting them. I mean, they found there's some bad actors out there bad actors in every part of it: life insurance, ESOPs, 401k, 831B captives. I've been vetting captive companies for 20 years, and there's just a few of them that I feel comfortable recommending. And they've also, in addition to my vetting, have gone to much higher powers than me with insurance company home offices, like Mass Mutual, New York Life, Guardian, etc. And they get vetted, and the 2 or 3 that we use, they're the only ones that have any kind of best rating. Most of the captives out there, they're shady. A lot of them are shady, and they're trying to take deductions, or they put the money in December and try to borrow it out in January. Well, that's a bozo no. You can't do that stuff. That's like that's exactly what the IRS is. That's counterproductive to the purpose of that captive. So and the people that have managed those captives won't allow that. They're not going to take in a customer to be a captive, client for them that they're going to have to be watching the back door on things they do. And the few wins they've had recently with captives were exactly that. They were captives that should never have been put in place. So that's a screening situation, and you want to screen it multiple ways. You look to the insurance company home office, you look to some of the things in the tax code that you can actually spot on your own, and you get down into the nitty gritty with the client. And if the client starts wanting to ask too many questions about cutting corners or getting too creative with a captive, then you don't do it. Stay away from it. It's not worth it. Go ahead. Yeah. The war chest of free money and in the life insurance cash value is a dramatically increased, and the death benefits, because when you repurpose it for the estate planning, and you've got a $20 million paid up policy or $30 million paid up policy, the case we're doing hopefully down to San Diego, the company's coming in with $150 million valuation. We think it's worth more like 100, but that's still two $50 million policies, plus building in actuarially the growth over the next 5 years. So maybe do $75 million policies for a projected valuation at time of exit, plus any key people. I know they've got, Brian, would you say they have probably 20 key people?
Well, 13 on the books that were technically key people, but the company is growing. So
Yeah, they just hired 35 people. Some of them are key.
You're talking about the San Diego company, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge opportunity. That company is growing quickly.
Yeah. So the total insurance there might be $250 million when the final thing stops.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all in their 40s, 50s. So it'll be a good premium, but it's going to be a lot of work. But the benefit is that when they get those policies paid up over the next 5 to 10 years, and they go on and do something else, because they're they're looking to get out to do something else.
Right.
They're going to have estate planning issues, and this already taken care of because of doing it through this structure. I think
Kelly, do you want to, I don't know if you addressed it, I just step out for a minute, but the 5-year runway for the 1042 qualification in terms of the C Corp, did you already cover that?
That's a very good point. You're going to run across, most companies are S Corps or they're LLCs or something like that. There's not a lot of companies are C Corp because the IRS doesn't like it. And in most cases, if you have a middle level CPA, they're going to say, well, an S Corp's better. You can take money out and do this and that. You don't want to pay double taxation. Well, there's only double taxation if there's money that is left for paying taxes. With an S Corp, if you got a $10 million company and you got $1 million profit, that $1 million, it's coming at you. It's like trying to take a sip from a fire hose. You're going to personally pay tax on $1 million, the K1 or whatever. With a C Corp, you can throw a tax firewall up. You can have it, you have 2 tax pockets instead of 1. So if you want to, it depends on how often you do this, you end up with money that's going to be subject to, retained earnings. But with the proper instruments like ESOPs, captives, etc., that money doesn't sit for retained earnings. You end up creating retained capital, and it's a whole different tax picture. The retained capital structures all the things for the ESOP, the captive, the insurance, everything else. So what you do is we try to get somebody to switch to a C Corp as soon as possible, because once you drop the US election and you go back to being a C Corp, you can't go back to an S Corp for 5 years. So if we get them to be a C Corp, and let's say they want to do a leveraged ESOP, they're too old, they don't have anything else out, and they want to do a leveraged ESOP because they just don't want to pay the tax. Well, they have to switch to a C Corp to get the 1042, the avoidance of the capital gains tax. Well, they're going to have, then that company is going to be a C Corp for the next 5 years. Now, the reason that's important is that most of the companies that have had an existing C Corp and they sell it, they take advantage of the 1042, they avoid the capital gains tax, and then the next morning they flip it back to an S corp. Well, ESOPs don't pay tax. So what you have done then is you've sold that company with a tax favored situation of not paying the capital gains taxes. And then you flipped it back to where all of the profit flows through to the shareholder, which is the ESOP, who doesn't pay any tax. So all that money goes into the benefit of funding all the repurchase obligation for all those shares of stock over the years. And that corporation is now, from that day forward, perpetually a tax-free corporation. That corporation will never pay tax again. So that's why that window that Brian brought up is something to keep in mind as you're talking about the fact finding start on the meetings with the client.
Wow.
Fun stuff.
It's fun stuff, and the good news is I don't have much of a headache as we keep talking about this stuff. So I'm starting to understand more and more, and I don't blame anybody if they're overloaded. You've got this headache. It's like, okay, I'm trying to keep this all straight and trying to learn it. It's a process, and like I said at the beginning, it's like learning a new language and figuring out. And not to mention, it's not just learning some of the intricacies, but how do we start a conversation with someone who we believe would be a candidate? And my first thought would be, I could help you to sell your company and have a guaranteed buyer and not pay taxes on it, would that be something we need to talk about so that you can exit your business in the next 5 to 10 or longer years?
Yeah, that's if you're getting a hold of an older guy that looks like something comes up where they're saying, yeah, I'm thinking about retirement. Okay. That's probably the best way to approach it. And if you can look for anybody younger that might even have a smaller growing company, I like to say, what do you do, et cetera. I say, I like to help the business owner take their taxable profit and reposition it entirely into a tax exempt structure that'll help the company grow at a higher level on an accelerated basis. And then at the same time, inherent in that same design is the ability to walk away without paying the capital gains tax. So any questions? This has been a long session, so.
Well, but it's been good. And I can't believe that you told me that you tried to do this in 20 minutes down in San Diego. I was like, I don't know how you could have done the subject justice. My goodness, there's so much here.
Yeah, that was fun.
I only got a private message that said that this gentleman is in one of those categories who feels like he's being overloaded, but it's good. So, and by the way, just so everybody knows, it is being recorded. I'm going to upload it to my YouTube. I'm going to put some reference links and such in there. Brian,
I have one thing to add here is if you have somebody who is you're not sure if they're a good candidate, I would say before approaching them with the concept, maybe call David, call Kelly, call Rich, call me, and kind of spitball the conversation a little bit and see what the other considerations are for that client. Because I always like to approach these conversations from a higher level financial planning, retirement planning perspective, because all roads lead to retirement planning and estate planning, right? Because this is not a perfect fit for every business owner, obviously. But if you're in doubt or you're not sure someone's a really good match, just reach out to one of us and we'll have a conversation about it.
Yeah, we have different forms. We have a few different fact finders. One's a more comprehensive fact finder, but we also have one that it's like 8 questions, and the questions are yes or no. And there are questions that probably a high percentage of them are yes answers, but the way they're written, but they're talking about tax savings, keeping the company, passing the company to the family. Generally, it leads to at least discussing and having a dialogue on it. And then on the opposite side of the page is a really high level, very succinct, not in depth, but talking about, do they have a pension? How much, what did they do in income last year? It's a very short, it could be done like in 10 minutes. And that's something that, as what Brian was talking about, if you want to use that, look at that fact finder, you can use it as a guide to have a discussion. and then talk about that with us in the spitball manner and say, is this a candidate? You know, and just posture it in such a way where, you know, you talk about the dialogue that David and I were sharing about, you know, repositioning profit. And if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few questions to see if there's a possibility it might work for you. Something, you know, something like that. And then we talk about it with.
Sanjay asked, can you share it? I think he's assuming the fact finders. Kelly, what you could do, you could just email them to me. And then what I'll do, because when I put them to YouTube, because I have the video discussion or description, I can put them in my Google Drive to be shared, and I can give a label for each one so people know which one is what. And so that would be an easy way to share it, and we don't have to field manual requests for it. So we definitely do it that way.
Okay.
And I got another one. We got asked was, will the PowerPoint be available?
It depends how you want to use it. When we have a PowerPoint that goes out, it has to have gone through compliance. So the PowerPoint that we used today was the one that we also used out in San Diego, and then previously we used it out in the Inland Empire. And actually, believe it or not, we have to send it back through compliance again. If you want to have it where we can put a PowerPoint together that is that one, and then have it go through compliance for whatever purpose you want to do. And again, since it's been through, it's not going to be the normal tremendous headache the compliance offers. It'll be, you know, a streamlined version. And we have an article coming out this coming month in California Broker that describes the kind of what we talked about today, but it's in a written form in terms of the structure and how we did it with a company. And if you want to use it for a group talk, something like this or a seminar, then we would want to sit down with you and say, okay, how do you want to have it postured? Do you want to just do the concepts? You don't want to get into do you want to do the diagram? Do you want to do the summary pages at the end? And then we can custom, kind of, I love the word bespoke. We can have it be a bespoke project for what you want to have it to show it.
The agent clarifies just for agent use only, just for his own personal study, it looks like. So
yeah, I think I mean, do you want to see the one we just actually use now?
Yeah, I mean, I know him, I could send it to him, you know, yes, he says yes.
Yeah.
It's on my computer, so I can send it to him, that's not a problem.
Yeah, you know, I feel comfortable with that. That has been through compliance. And
but I you that if you wanted to show something like this to a client, like, no, I only want to pique someone's interest and then tee you guys up, and that you guys kind of take it from there, or you go through the fact find that you're going to share with me, figure out, is this person a viable candidate, and then tee you up. This is not to try to do on our own. But for the first time, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, part of our normal process in the feasibility portion of it is we do put together a PowerPoint for the specific client once we have all the facts and circumstances. So they'll get their own special made one for them based on all their current numbers. So if it's a viable client, we do one for every client.
Yeah, and in terms of this one, if you want to have David forward it to you, go ahead and do it and then walk through it. And then I don't know where you're located, because I guess I don't know
Michigan.
if Michigan. Well, I was going to say get a cup of coffee and go through it. My probably the first 30 ESOPs I did, it was off a yellow pad. I mean, if you get enough handle on a PowerPoint, you can kind of diagram it out a little bit in terms of concept. And if you get them to understand what an ESOP is, as opposed to a pension, that's 90% of the battle. And just, do you want to write a check for the deduction, or do you want to keep the money and have the tax code give them the deduction? It's retained capital, tax exempt retained capital, to give them a fully insured financial infrastructure is really the key. And if you can internalize it enough to where you can put it on a yellow pad. You can do that in back in the old Grantham one card system. I was having double breakfast, double lunch. And I was booking 15 appointments a week, and you'd have like a 10-minute that is the crux of that whole presentation. And it's other people's money. Bottom line, it's money you're not going to pay taxes on anymore. And you'll fund benefits that are in a tax exempt structure. So yeah, feel free to look at that and write out 20 questions on it. And then we'll, by phone or email or whatever else, we can cover that to where you feel comfortable enough to use it as a door opener. I mean, anybody that wants to get into the corporate market, I'm having a hard time finding a better door opener than would you like to take your profit and keep it all and set it up so you don't pay income tax, you don't pay capital gains tax, you fund for your estate taxes with money that was provided by the government. I mean, it's a great door opener. You just don't do it with a small donut shop that makes $110,000 a year. It's try to get the minimum size company.
So we got a couple more. So Michael says, thanks once again, David, for high value discussion. Gracias to Kelly Smith, Brian, and Rich. Sanjay added, the fact find would help me qualify the clients before I even trouble you with the inquiry. I've got a few potential family offices moving to the US who might qualify for your service. So
awesome. You're a fine lad, Sonny. Yeah, actually, Sanjay, I think the one pager is better. I mean, the other fact finder we use that we've branded under us is a combination of stuff I've picked up at New York Life, Mass, Guardian, and put into a consolidation. So that the large fact finder isn't a lot different than if you called up Mass Mutual and say, send me your business fact finder. It might be missing 4 or 5 of the questions that we would ask. The Guardian would have a different 4 or 5 questions that we would ask. But we can forward that too. I don't have it. Rich, do you have it you can pull it down and send it to David?
Yeah, I'll send it to David.
Okay.
yeah, I'll put all into the future video description, and it'll all be downloaded from my Google Drive, so everybody will be able to get it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Very cool. Sanjay says he needs a 1-pager. Yeah, of course he does. But we'll take care of you. One moment at a so, no, but this
I'll go with that.
now here's the other thing. I was working on this language with Tom this morning because we're working on my explanation of services. And one of the things that I start off by saying, do you know what a CFP is? And of course, Tom's like, oh man. And I just say, I don't do anything they do. You see, with CFPs, what they teach business owners to do is to do or planning. Should you invest in your business or invest in other people's businesses through stocks and bonds? Well, I teach people how to do and planning. So you can invest in your business and retain liquidity so you can maintain control. And so, we're solving that problem because a lot of business owners, well, do I invest somewhere else or do I invest in my own company? And then taking it further to use the tax code.
Yeah.
So I'm just talking on a personal level, but it can easily, depending on the company, can segue into more of this planning. That could be a fit. And we do it on the business entity side, not just the owner's personal planning.
Yeah. And one of the things I stress is that, nothing wrong with a CFP or a CLU, ChFC, or any of those.
It's fun to make. I'm sorry, but
No. What I'm saying, I'm not. I'm agreeing with you. The thing is that generally the people that are a CFP, they're focused on investments and internal rate of return and managing money. And there's some life insurance, there's some estate planning, but if you sit through all the CFP courses, they're really more aligned with working at a Morgan Stanley or something. But the other side of it is, touch base with the life side, touch base with the estate planning and the business planning but at the same time, when you're looking at that, it's like a good example. There was a CFP that's working with a an office down in San Diego, and he was referred to me by the attorney at Guardian. And what had happened is that a year earlier, one of his best clients, and he'd sold a couple $10 million policies to the two owners for their buy sell. And they made a comment to him. They said, we're thinking of selling our company. We're thinking of retiring. And so either he didn't perceive it to be, like, let's work on this right away. But I get a phone call from him after Jim Magner sent him to me. And he's saying, I got to have help on this. They've done they're doing an ESOP. Well, what they're doing is they're doing an ESOP with a group here in California, and it's a leveraged ESOP. And what was happening is that the owner of that ESOP firm, his son, is a life insurance guy. So they were trying to not only take the client and do the ESOP, but they were going to replace the two $10 million policies that he had in there. Well, I got in a day late and a dollar short, but we preserved his insurance. We managed to move the needle a little bit on the ESOP structure, and at least positioned it so that as they finish their ESOP process and become fully retired, that the extra money created, they're going to still keep it with him to manage it. So the focus of the planner, it's like you got to start off with a shotgun, and then or a wide range of something, and then later on you dial it down, and you're pinpointing the bullet for right between the eyes. So it's you gotta approach it that way. And in a situation like what Sanjay's talking about with a family office, again, most of those family offices, they're not doing something like what we're doing with the business side. The family office might have $80 million in apartment complexes and jack, jumbo jack dealership, like franchises, but the tax structure inside the corporate structure is not always being paid attention to, especially with the ESOP stuff. So, but again, you got to take a step back and look at the whole situation, because we get into, and also if a business owner we're dealing with two different instances now where the guy has a major company. One guy has like 13 Montessori schools, but he also has a whole bunch of other companies, and his daughters own those. And same, almost identical situation with another guy that was referred to us by his investment banking person, and he says, I need to do an ESOP. Well, he's got an environmental firm, but he has another 20 firms. I mean, and at first he wanted to retire in 2 years, but then after going through the dialogue with him, it dawned on him, he doesn't work on the main company anymore. It's all his senior people. He says, you know what? I don't need to sell that. I'm pulling $1.2 million out of that thing without even going into the office. So why do that? So what we're going to have to do is take a look. And because if we deal with the ESOP on one company, but there's a lot of other companies that are related in either by doing business with each other or having similar ownership, we have the situation with, what's the terminology? I think it's
Right. Transmutation.
Yeah. Yeah. They have, they have too much common ownership, and they either have to do it for all of them or they do it for none of them. So there's ways to carve that up, and that's important.
Affiliated services.
Yeah, affiliated services, and the other one is it's not common ownership, but it's a technical term for that. There's an IRS term for it. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. And by the way, Brian, I didn't mean anything personal by that earlier. Brian is a CFP, if you can't see that. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, he made up for it. He got his RICP on top of that. So
there's another. There's one question that was asked. I want to add another one on top of it, which is, do you have preferred carriers? And the question I would add on top of it is, what does an average case look like, and what does the agent split look like, and how does that look? Make sure we talk about what's in the agent.
The preferred carriers, we have it. my whole career has been dealing with mutual companies. And in this particular design, a whole life product is preferable because you can actually take technically a paid up policy. And that's important. At some point, they're going to have to take a paid up policy, not an overfunded UL or VUL or IUL that hopefully doesn't require more premiums. And people that don't want to use the whole life, they say, well, I get better stuff on an IUL or whatever. That's not the focus of the life insurance here. The focus of life insurance is to hold everything else together with guarantees, because everything in this whole structure is based on IRS. It's based on the code. And what we've seen though, like, there was a period of time back in the early 80s that variable UL was taking over the industry. And for a while we saw IUL like that too. But we've had Rich, what was the thing a few years ago with all the national insurance commissioners on like AV 49 or something like that?
AG 49. Yeah.
AG 49. That was supposed to, there's a lot of people not doing what they should do with even an IUL, VUL, whatever. And the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and all the powers that be were saying, we got to pull our horns. We got to make it so that agents can't misrepresent. Well, right after they passed it, the carriers and the agents that wanted to, they got into all sorts of multipliers. They still circumvented the regulation. And now with the 7702 that just passed, we're hearing it now, like Rich is one of he was a former president of the Inland Empire NAFA, and now he's on the board for California and with tiptoes into the national, and he's in touch with, going up on the Hill and going to Congress and going to Sacramento. And we're hearing everything. I mean, Congress is going after the tax-free buildup again. And what's going to happen is people using IUL and VUL, they're selling it. Most of them are selling it as an investment, and as a retirement vehicle, a private pension. Well, if you look back in the archives, the term private pension and all these different things that people are starting to use again, terminology, ended up in huge court settlements back in Florida with, back then it was Metropolitan Life, but MetLife and Prudential and a lot of the carriers, they got hammered. They paid billions in fines over the language and the sales techniques of universal life. And so what we're seeing now, and I don't cast it in bronze, but I'm telling you right now that if the industry doesn't clean itself up and we keep misrepresenting IUL as an investment or getting into comparisons between whole life and IUL, we're slitting our throat. And our language is going to be used against us. Congress is going to come along and say, well, you're selling this Pac Life or this such and such or whatever as an IUL, as an investment. You're saying it with your own words. It's an investment. So we're going to start taxing it. And I tell you, with the fact that our industry is going to get attacked, and they may have to do a sacrificial lamb. They may have to throw IUL products under the bus to keep the wolves from the door. And if we don't start selling life insurance as what it was supposed to be, a life insurance policy, and the cash values, regardless of whole life, IUL, anybody else, the cash value was there for the intent of having that coverage have a reserve that keeps the policy in force for their whole life. Because the reason permanent insurance was even developed is 150 years ago, farmers and everybody else in the world were buying term policies, and they were priced actuarially to the person's expectation of life. But what was happening is that they were getting too expensive, and people were they were lapsing their policies, dying uninsured, putting a burden on society, leaving their family, without resources to protect themselves. So the industry, government, everybody else jumped in to create what eventually became whole life by taking a little bit extra money ahead of time and establishing reserve to keep the policy in force for the person's whole life. And that was essential. And mutual companies would take a little bit more and then they put it back as dividends. And I forgot which one of the broker dealers, I'll think of it. Oh, yeah, E.F. Hutton bought Life of California and re-engineered it to become UL. Equitable of Iowa, Equitable of New York said, well, let's use portfolios. Let's use mutual funds mentality. And we had variable UL. And then policies were blowing up because they picked the wrong funds. And so they came along with IUL with a 0% guarantee. Some of them have 1% or whatever. But that's how it's gone. And right now, if we don't use the right product for the, it's like playing golf. If you don't use the 3-iron for the right shot, it's you use a driver to putt. You don't do that. I do, but but anyway, so I'd say for the type of product, we like to stay within companies with a high Comdex. We like the traditional, the mutual companies. There's 2 or 3 we really prefer the most, like Mass or Guardian. We're looking real hard at Penn Mutual, and we've had discussions with New York Life, and there's a lot of good structured contracts out there. And the case size will go past all the minimums. I know New York Life has a minimum premium and all that stuff to broker. And somebody was telling me that they're even brokering at Northwestern now with a certain minimum size. So these cases will go way beyond those minimum size. And I think that if we use a vetted structure like the ESOP, the captive, et cetera, we pick the right product, and we don't try to have something do something it's not supposed to do. And then generally, in terms of compensation, we'll follow the MDRT splits. Generally, because of how much we have to do, and especially on the first few cases, we don't want the person bringing the case to us trying to do what we do. We'd rather just say, bring the candidate, we'll do all the turnkey stuff. Generally, we won't see a 50-50 split. I mean, we might see something go between, say, 20 and 40, maybe 30 to 40. But it's, if somebody just says, hey, here's my uncle, he's got 35 restaurants, go talk to him. Well, that's a 20% type of thing. If there's somebody you've been working with very well for a number of years, and when we say, hey, we need the last 5-year tax returns, we've got it from you that day. We don't have to call this CPA and the CPA before him. And if we get involved with the valuation people, there's an immense amount of work behind the scenes. So it'll probably run somewhere between 20 and 40 on a case. But again, they're $1 million premiums. So we've got to split up our side by 6 or 7 people. So and each person does something a little different. So hope that answers the question.
I think we nailed that one. For me personally, I love the term life insurance wealth contract, because I dare anybody to tell me that we're trying to build a value in the policy, especially if it's designed for cash value accumulation, and it's definitely a contract that's governed by federal and state laws. So yeah. Anybody that there shouldn't be any compliance issue with that to help bring the new clarity to what life insurance really can do.
Yeah,
because as to how sometimes, because I have a feeling, and anybody that I've met that really does IULs, they don't like the multipliers. The only reason the multipliers are in there is because they're selling by illustration. They want the illustration as rosy as possible. And so everybody I talk to that's ever talked about IUL, like, they don't like it.
Yeah. But one thing further on the thing I was bringing up earlier about Congress and stuff, I can't say strongly enough that if you're not a member of NAFA and or FINSECA, which is the merger of AALU and Gamma, especially NAFA. I mean, back when Dan Rostenkowski tried to get tax after the 84 Act, and we ended up with MEC, NAFA protected us from having a fully taxable cash value buildup. Congress, they're reaching, and you know, NAFA is, what, 50, 60 a month or something like that, maybe less if you're new.
30 a month,
Yeah,
dollars a month.
that
Yeah.
money protects your career. I cannot.
Career insurance, we call it.
Yeah, it really is. I've been in the industry for 46 years, and I've seen at least 4 instances that NAFA saved our butt.
Well, the most recent one was the AB5 here in California, where we would have all been employees of the insurance companies. We would have lost our independent contracting where we are now. We would have all been employees of either or insurance company. So that was huge. Was just the most recent AB5. So.
And you don't know what's in those evil minds back in Sacramento and Washington, D.C.
Want to lump us into gig economy, and I could see needing some rights for the gig workers, but at the same time, don't classify us. We're a totally different breed. So,
Well, I hope I've enjoyed this. I hope it's been beneficial. I'll tell you, this is where the bigger business market's headed, and the handwriting's on the wall. I mean, they're making moves every day on pensions and the stuff they're doing with 401ks. I mean, right now,
state mandated retirement plans.
Oh yeah, state mandated long-term care. I mean, where they're going, this avoids it, and again, it's across the board, the left side of the aisle, the right side of the aisle, because in its purest form, and me being a hardcore capitalist, it's hard to say these words leaving my mouth, but it's in its purest form, an ESOP is almost a socialistic tool. I mean, it really goes back to sharecropping and everything else. I mean, if you're sharing the wealth with the employees, that's almost socialism, kind of. And that's why guys like Cory Booker are signing on the legislation to enhance ESOPs. I mean,
distinct difference, because the ESOP, you're voluntarily doing this as opposed to government mandates doing it. And I'm vehemently opposed to the government forcing me to do something, whereas I want to be a giver and I want to share the wealth and take all the advantages with it. That's just take advantage of the tax code and volunteering to do it, of my own volition. I don't want the government forcing me to do nothing. So that's where I'm at, and I'm sure you share that point of view.
Oh, very much. It's a nice thing that you can use what you normally would have been paying in taxes or making subject to that, to use it to benefit the owner and the employees. And because the structure is such, you're looking for people with, the numbers I'm hearing from some of these companies that people are talking about bringing us in on. I mean, one of them's like $600 million. I mean, with, probably 50 executives. I mean, you're talking about a case that's, if that case were to come to fruition, that's probably about a $7 million, $8 million premium. And, that's nice to have. But anyway.
Real quick. Okay. So Sanjay asked, can we also use leverage to maximize the return on this structure?
More specific, when you say leverage, here's what we leverage now. Generally, the stock is paper. On more than one occasion, we've actually done the premium financing for the captive. And then we're getting to the point where we're probably going to do premium financing on the life insurance on most cases, because if we're going to be talking about retained capital, people are going to want to hold on to as much of that as they can to build their business. Now, if they're going to put it into, Lamborghinis and stuff up the nose, I mean, that's stupid. But I mean, yeah, there's already a lot of leverage, but Sanjay, elaborate a little bit when you say, can you
financing? Yes, thanks. So
yeah,
he just commented.
Okay. And we've already scouted out all the premium financing entities. I mean, from the small community banks to, Wintrust, which used to be First Insurance, which was AI Credit, which was, I've been working with premium financing since 1982. When I was doing things with ball players and we were financing single premium policies and things like that. So we know the market, we've vetted them. We like to make sure that the premium finance platforms are contractually strong for the borrower. If you're not careful and you just try to shop rates, there's some premium financing entities out there right now that some people are claiming to get funds for 1.75 or 2%. But then you read it and you got to give them your firstborn child to get out of the contract. I mean, a lot of times people will do a 5-year contract on premium financing, but we give them so much cash, they want to get out of the premium financing in year 3. Or do they allow you to term it out? Like, you want to do premium for financing for 5 years, but you're not putting any more premium in after the 5th year, but you don't really have money you want to allocate to pay it off. Well, will that entity flip it to a term loan for 5 or 10 years? Those kind of things are really important to notice. And, there's some of the ones that have big names on premium financing, their contract provisions are often not the most favorable. And like surrender penalties, all sorts of stuff. So it's and working with them. I mean, there's a couple of companies out there really easy to work with. But their rates are not the least expensive rates, So it's premium financing. We do premium financing probably going forward on almost every contract, because if we're going to save the capital for the business owner, let's really save him the capital. Let's let him use it in the business and use other people's, because if a business is growing well at 10-20%, or like this firm down in San Diego, they're growing by 30% a year. Now, whether they're going to continue growing by 30% a year, nobody knows, but they're showing indications of it. Well, why would they want to tie up life insurance money, $2 million in premium? Because we're expecting probably a few $1 million in premium there. Why would they want to tie that up when they can help them grow at 30%? Use the other people's money for 3%, 4%. Now, rates are not going to stay low because what's going on with Washington and everything else. I mean, the Fed moved a quarter point or whatever for the first time in a few years. So premium financing will be more expensive. I don't see it going any other way. The rates aren't going to stay at 2.75 or 3. They're going to go up, but they're going to go up in proportion to the economy.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense that the more levers within the premium financing contract, the more ways you can customize it. Of course, the cost is going to go up a little bit to help offset that, because it's not going to necessarily be predictable. Just like with a life insurance contract, there's a lot of different things, and it's how you pull the levers.
Yeah.
I
saw something pop up on the question.
I'll get right there. So Sanjay said, thanks for that. Awesome. I've got a few deals already lined up for you. We'll talk next week. So,
no, but somebody asked a question about ownership or something.
Dan asked, can the owner still maintain 100% ownership and control after an ESOP is established? Can they use it, just use it for employee retirement plan and also save on taxes? To me, the answer sounds like yes.
They have until they, okay, on our contributory model, the amount that's going in, it does not affect their ownership. Two things to keep in mind. The employees of the corporation are beneficiaries of the trust. They're not holding on to the stock. The stock is held in trust for them as a beneficiary by the trustee, by the plan. As such, they are not required to be able to look at the books unless the owner wants to. There's a lot of companies out there that's part of their kumbaya thing, but they're not, unless the owner wants to, they're not supposed to be able to look at the books. They can't say, okay, we want casual Fridays, or I want to move a branch office near my home, or, I mean, they don't have any control. The point at which that switches is when you go into a leveraged ESOP, and you've sold more than 51% to the ESOP trust. At that point, voting rights pass through to the ESOP. Now, bear in mind, the owner is probably the biggest allocation inside the ESOP because he's a participant as well, because he's an employee. So the owner will always be probably, I mean, there's some people that have salespeople that make 3 times what the owner makes or something, but in most cases, the owner will have the majority of voting rights, even if they're passed through. Generally, when that situation gets near there, the trustee, the board, the owner, they sit down with the employees and say, okay, these are the kind of things that you might want to be thinking about that we may vote on. If they're thinking of going public, that's something where the voting rights pass through. Even if it's 100% stock is not even vested yet. So certain items, the voting rights pass through, or when the trust owns more than 51%, aside from the owner's percentage. So if the owner owns 18% and the trust is at 51%, it still needs to go another 18% before it allows for the voting rights. There was a number of articles that go out, and they were talking about leveraged ESOPs. In the design of the sale, especially if you have a friendly trustee that sees that it's in the benefit of the people, the owner can sell 100% of the value of the company to the ESOP and still maintain control until they're bought out. That's a case-by-case basis. It's based on the contract. It's based on where a lot of the people that were working in the leveraged ESOP marketplace, most of their insurance sale is on exit strategies for the owner and the key people that are going to be stepping away in a little while. So generally, under those situations, the voting rights can be, spread around. But in most cases, the owner has 100% of control till they don't want to. That's the bottom line. Because they make the exit strategy worded correctly, where while they're still involved until they're fully paid off, they have control. Anybody else?
Well, hey, we've been at 2.5 hours. So we set a record for these events that I've been doing. It's great. I'm sure that a lot of people are overwhelmed, but at the same time, we've been able to take the time to explain and ask questions and such. I'm sure there'll be more questions that'll come up later on. Yeah.
And this point that we're now, where we want to start calling every CPA we know and say, hey, did you file extensions, et cetera, and explain to them the retroactive in the last year. Approaching the CPAs by saying, would you like to be a hero, really helps. I mean, if the CPA can be the person that brings you to the table, that's important. I mean, I can't think of hardly any case where the CPA didn't have a reasonable amount of influence on what we finally did. And we're in a situation now where we can make the CPA a hero. And that's important. That's important. And on those guys, they're going to want to give it to the best client. They're not going to toss you their donut shop. They're going to give you, if they want to be a hero, you're going to be put in front of a company that is talking serious, 7 and 8 figures in terms of potential savings. But the CPA has to buy into it, and we've been very good at that. And we have a lot of good CPA firms that are ESOP, like Gelman. There's a lot of good CPA firms out there. And we're in touch with like Morgan Lewis, the attorneys there. I mean, all of the top national CPA and law firms that deal with ESOPs, there's a level of relationship that we already have with them. And so, if a CPA is having a hard time understanding it, then you bring in a CPA that has overseen 100 of them. And one of the leveraged ESOP firms that I like a lot, that actually helped me do 3 of my leveraged ESOPs, the managing partner is a CPA, and he's got his master's in taxation as well. And he's past president of the finance committee for the ESOP Association. And they also provide third-party administration work. So you can always use a big hammer to get that rusty nail driven in. So
Nice.
Thanks, David, for putting this together. Appreciate that. I got to go, guys. But
I do too.
thanks, David.
You've got another job as a PR firm. This is a good thing for all parties. So.
Yeah, and believe me, I'm the primary beneficiary because I want to get more income. Hey, the fact I created that business valuation equivalent thing here. Hey, I paid for my.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to steal that. Tell Tom that I'm not going to put it in writing. I'm just going to use it verbally. But
all right. Well, thank you so much, and for everybody that participated. This has been a long time, and believe me, nature's calling. But I'm going to end the recording, and I'm going to get it uploaded to YouTube. Everybody send me your. By the way, we were talking about set up like a boot camp or sometime that we could go into far more detail.
Yeah.
Just private message me or send me an email. Let me know if you're interested in that, and I'll just forward that inquiry onto you guys, and then you can figure out how to schedule something, whether online, in person, or whatever we're going to do.
Yeah. In your thing on Facebook, you might want to tell people, say, it went well. We covered most everything I would want to cover. So I think we got a lot of business dialogue, technical things out here today. But it's still you need to do a little bit deeper dive before you can feel comfortable even broaching the subject with a business owner or a CPA. And right now we need to get the CPAs in line. But if you want to,
one thing that Brian Bloom was saying is that how to approach CPAs is, can I get your opinion? And then you got to illustrate something and get their opinion on it. And if we can have that a well-versed conversation, just to pique them, and then we could go from there with the CPA. So
start off and say, hey, there's something really excited that we just saw in a webinar. I want to get your opinion on it. That's a great way to do it. That is a great way to do it. I'd say if in your column, talk about how we did today, and if we need to do a deep dive, and we can disseminate things ahead of time, like the fact finder, or there's a lot of things we have in our arsenal that have gone through compliance, like one pagers on this, or like that one you pulled up off the website, the difference between a leveraged ESOP and a contributory ESOP. And the reason we're using a lot of the trademark terms is because, like, for instance, on a contributory ESOP, that confuses people, because when you think about a contributory pension, it means that, the business is putting in pension, but you're contributing also. And the word contributory will confuse the average CPA, CFO, et cetera. And so until you go through the explanation saying, well, no, that because it's an ESOP, we're only contributing, it's 180 degrees different than the normal qualified plan contributory. It's opposite. So what we did is, in fact, I think Mike Harden was the one that helped me come up with the term pre-leveraged. And then further developing it as we were bringing things like the captive and stuff, we were talking capitalized. In other words, the real part about this, that if we start promoting the capitalized, this structure at the ESOP Association meetings and the NCO meetings and stuff, that terminology will bring a lot of the other entities to the marketplace. So it'll be an exciting world.
Right. Well, thank you so much. End live video now, but I'm so glad that we did this. So hopefully people reach out to us, you, Kelly, me, whoever, and we can help people, move forward on those, on that kind of planning and those conversations.
Yeah.
That's great. So I'm gonna hit end live now, because I know that